In February of 1983, an altercation between African-American family members and two white Montgomery police officers set the stage for what would become known as the Todd Road incident. There are varying depictions of what happened. The point of this film is not to assign guilt or innocence one way or the other, but rather to celebrate what spawned from this turbulent time in Montgomery history.
One of the most iconic and historic cities in the United States of America, Montgomery, Alabama has long been held as both the birthplace of civil rights and the cradle of the Confederacy. These two meaningful yet polar opposite views of one city once set the stage for differing perspectives on Montgomery's historical significance. A history of deep-seated racial tension between whites and blacks, marred by some of the most vivid imagery of bigotry and intolerance, gave the city its most notable reputation as a hotbed for inequality and discrimination. Many incidents and individuals in Montgomery, Alabama have helped shape the worldview on race relations today. The civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott, the struggles of Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks have all been very well documented in the annals of American history. There have been, however, untold stories of other incidents that have occurred affecting race relations in Montgomery. One such story is that of the Todd Road incident.
And to this day, I can tell you that I do not believe anyone knows all of what happened at Todd Road, at the Montgomery County Jail, and certainly not all that happened in the courtroom.
Police say detectives Les Brown and Ed Spivey answered a missing persons call in Madison Park around 11:30. Shortly after the officers arrived at a house off of Todd Road, authorities say they were taken hostage, disarmed, and tortured.
Officer Spivey was held on a couch by a black male with a switchblade to his throat, while others beat on him, and they had Officer Brown in a back room beating on him at that time.
Police say one of the officers talked a woman in the house into calling police.
And at that time, Lieutenant Bodine responded, had to kick the door in where the officers were, and at that point, we're trying to still put together exactly what happened in the house.
I noticed two white males come through the front door. They kicked it through, and they had guns in their hands. Each of them had a gun in their hand. My other uncle grabbed the big one, and they flung him on the couch, and they grabbed his gun from him. As they grabbed the gun from him, he went to his back and pulled out a smaller gun, and they took that one from him, too. At this time, I got scared, and I called the cops.
I had a knife held in my throat for a good portion of it. I finally got the knife away from the felon and threw it away into another room.
And then they took the small one to the back room, and we told him that we called the police, and then he identified himself then. At no time before that did he identify himself.
They were telling us they ought to kill us, that this is how they treat the police officers up north.
The cops fired 3 to 4 shots after I had called them, and they came and we seen the sirens, and they fired 3 to 4 shots, and my entire family ran to the back room.
Both officers were rushed to a local hospital for treatment of their injuries. Both are listed in stable condition. However, police say none of the 26 people in the house at the time of the beatings was injured when they were taken into custody, and none have yet been charged as police try to put the pieces together.
That's blood. That's how you earn hazardous duty pay. As in the pocket, Officer Spivey. These officers, in the performance of their duty, displayed restraint in unbelievable terms.
My name is Brian Bodine. I currently live in Orange Beach, Alabama. At the time of Todd Road, I was lieutenant and assistant shift commander on the 3rd shift for Montgomery Police Department. I started moving towards the porch, mounted the porch, moved back against the wall, sliding across the wall with my back to the house. At that point, I guess I stepped into the light enough that Les Brown saw me out of the corner of his eye. That's the first time I recognized him, first time I knew it was him. And I could see the people on the couch. He was on the couch closest to the door. His shirt was ripped. He had blood all over his shirt. Spivey, who I did not know at the time because I could not see him, see his face, was laying next to him, and his shirt was completely off. His bulletproof vest was the only thing that he had exposed. And when Les saw me, he turned and he faced me, and there was this expression of relief.
They took our guns and pointed them at our heads while we were in there, and it was, like I said, and then they'd hit you with sticks and kick you in the face and things. So it was continuous from the time we got in there to the time that we finally got out.
He kicked the door open. When he did that, Officer Spivey ran out past him. Officer Brown then got up and tried to run out the doors. He was running out, 2 shots were heard.
When I leveled the shotgun at the room, Les immediately pitched forward off the couch and threw a body block into the males that were in front of him. When he did that, Spivey came over the top of him, coming out of the door, and hit me as he came out of the door and knocked me back. He bounced off the screen, and then he hit the door, and he fell through the door, and he hung on the cross rail. And I let go of the shotgun, and I reached and grabbed him by the back of the pants, and I was hollering at him. I asked him, "What's going on?" And at that time, the first shot was fired. And I let go of Spivey, and I came back down on the room. Again, at that point, I did not see anyone with a firearm. So I didn't know who fired the shot or where it came from. I backed down off the steps and kept the house covered, and I kept hollering at Les to come on, and he started crawling across the threshold of the door. As he was about half in and half out of the threshold, there were 2 shots. Those 2 shots were the shots that hit Les.
During the trial, I had the privilege to represent, for the most part, the Taylor family. One of the principal defendants, and the one that the city believed to be the trigger man, was Worry Taylor. I found these people to be different from the typical criminal defendant that you might run into who had intentionally gone out and committed an offense. When I first met these people, I met them at the jail on a Sunday afternoon after the papers and the news media had portrayed them as having taken hostages, assaulted some police officers, shot a police officer. Basically, for 2 days in the media, they had been described as thugs. But when I got up to the jail, they all had Bibles, and I interviewed them independently. They had Bibles. They had no criminal records. They were unlike any defendant that I had ever defended. Morris Dees went down to the sheriff's office, and this was probably when all 11 were in jail. He had been reading about the case in the papers, and Morris Dees, unbeknownst to us, us being the defense attorneys, went down to the sheriff's department, and they all knew him, and said, "I'm Morris Dees, and I want to sign their bonds." And they were all released.
And the bond was set for these people at a very high number, from 500,000 to $1 million. I can't remember exactly the amount, and these people couldn't get out on bond. Several weeks had passed, they'd remained in jail, and because they had no property in Alabama, and to put up for the bond, and members of the black community in Montgomery who had financial assets were rightly maybe leery that these people might post their bond, get out on jail, they'd go back to Michigan, and they might not come back. I was sitting at home about 9 o'clock at night talking to my wife, and I said, I just think it's unfair that they're sitting there in jail. And my wife and I got in the car and drove down to the Montgomery County Jail, and I walked in, and they know me pretty well down there, and I said, I'd like to sign the bond on these people from the Todd Road. And I think the officer behind the desk, turned 5 shades of pale. He said, what's this? So he immediately calls District Attorney Jimmy Evans on the phone, and handed me the phone. I said, Jimmy, I came down here to sign the bonds. I have property in Montgomery, and I had made a little bit of checks on these people and saw that they were from fine families and good people, had good jobs, and I trusted they'd come back.
Every criminal case has a soft spot. And the defense counsel who wins in those cases does so only if he can find, first of all, and exploit those soft spots.
You had nobody would hear you if you were black, and if you reported that you were a victim of police brutality. I mean, it was that bad.
White folks saw a gathering of blacks with out-of-town tags on good-looking, expensive cars. They saw drugs. It was just that simple. They saw drugs. And so they hollered for this boy to stop. When he looked around, what he saw was 2 white guys with pistols in a plain, unmarked car in civilian clothes. So he took off. They fired at him. He, fortunately, was just hit in one of his fingers. And he ran into the house, screaming, talking about 2 white men trying to kill me. They run into this house without identifying themselves, without saying police. They just broke in the house behind this boy. And then that's when all hell broke loose. Now, the softest spot in the DA's case was the fact that these people were down here for a funeral, and that day, police officers had escorted them in these big fine cars with out-of-town tags, had escorted these folks to the funeral, to the gravesite, and back. Now, all these 2 officers had to do, if they suspected drugs at this location, was to get on the horn, call headquarters, and say, hey, here's what I'm looking at. And headquarters would have told them, or I'm sure would have told them, look, hey, we just escorted those folks to a funeral. They're down here for a funeral. And there would have been no Todd Road.
At the time, all of the facts about that Todd Road situation were not brought out at the time. I mean, it took years and years for that story to really be told.
Clearly, there was a law enforcement point of view that wished to see the Taylor family members tried, convicted, and punished. Another point of view was the point of view of those who simply wanted it to be over with some semblance of justice on every side. And there was another point of view quite clearly, including the Taylor family itself, that simply wanted it to go away without the Taylors suffering any consequence at all. So it was a conflicted aura in the city. People simply weren't sure what to make of it.
Montgomery was on a brink, in my opinion, and there were such high emotion, high talk that My fear was that one day it could explode and we could become a city known for violence, that we could be literally torn apart in so many ways.
Todd Road erupted. This city was like a racial tinderbox. I mean, it was in bad shape. Police would do whatever they wanted to do to black people especially, and it would be covered up.
I learned a long time ago that usually the truth's somewhere in the middle, and the fight is to get to that middle. In this case, we had 2 police officers who were seriously wounded. That was wrong. We also had a family that was disturbed at a very difficult time of mourning for them. That was wrong. And further, apparently, some of those family members were abused, both physically and emotionally, possibly by police officers. Trying to get to the truth, who did what to whom, and why, and when, we never got there.
Many of those involved in the Todd Road incident feel there was no adequate resolution. There were no convictions, no sentencing, and ultimately the case was settled. Of course, the events of that fateful evening are subject to interpretation, and exactly what occurred will probably never be known. But more important than the outcome of the case are the lessons learned from that defining moment.
The events that occurred at 123 Todd Road on February 23, 1983 in Montgomery have eluded the national spotlight, yet are significant to the inception of one of the city's most successful multicultural organizations, Leadership Montgomery.
Remember the Todd Road incident, of course, and I was coming back from Birmingham the next day, and one of the leaders in Montgomery was calling for the National Guard to come and occupy Montgomery and quell us. And my thought, it was like I'm sure most people, was gee whiz, I mean, we're shooting ourselves in the foot one more time. What was as I look back, Todd Road really wasn't the problem. It was a terrible thing. But what it did was, in my mind, I think in others, it uncovered that the leadership of the community, the perceived leadership of Montgomery, from the different communities were communicating with each other on this issue and others, not directly, but through the press. And there are better ways to get to true communication than to communicate through a third party.
Well, I start from a childhood reflecting from a white middle-class family and my experiences. I go back to things that stick out, memories, is pick-up football at Cloverdale Field from the age of about 10, and we didn't have enough kids to play football on both teams, and a black young man came down the sidewalk who asked us to play football with us. And so we got up a catch-up football game, and a police car came by. And the police car called him over and put him in the back seat of the police car, and we went over there to see about it, and they told us to leave. And they told him that he couldn't play with us, and he couldn't play on Cloverdale playground because he was black. And then I come back when my children were at the Montgomery Academy, and they had a professor to come in and meet with all the families and discuss what the Montgomery Academy needed to do. And I brought the question up about diversity at school, that I felt like my children only knew 20 students well, but not a very diverse student body, and what that impact it might have on their lives. And the advisor of Montgomery Academy looked at me and said, well, who do you work with? Who do you have to work with that's black? And I thought about it, and I said, well, really, I don't have any black relations at all.
I was in college when Rosa Parks boarded that bus one day and wouldn't give up her seat. And, you know, my thought at that time was, she's just a troublemaker. Why is she doing this? Not realizing just the injustice that so many people had to endure. And I believe Todd Road was just that flashpoint that made a lot of people who shared similar thoughts realize We need to do something about this.
And what I did was I went to see, in this feeling of frustration, the people who I thought were people of goodwill and to get advice. You know, what do you do? And just sort of reaching out, trying to make sense out of what was going on in the maelstrom. And then there's a group of men that I meet with once a month, still do, in Atlanta, and I shared with them my frustration. One of them told me about Leadership Atlanta. Another told me about Leadership Georgia, and that there was an organization, the wheel had been invented, that worked in other places. And so shortly thereafter, Lanny Crane and I were fishing together with some other guys out in the country, brim fishing, and probably weren't having much luck. And we shared with each other. I didn't know Lanny particularly well at that time, but I always looked up to him and always admired him, like I did Bucks and Bobby Wheel and others. And explained to him, but we shared with each other, we vented for each other, and quickly came to the conclusion that we were frustrated and a bit angry at the same time. And I think identified communications as the issue. Then I told him about what I knew about Leadership Atlanta and Leadership Georgia, and said, Lanny, why don't we form a Leadership Montgomery? And he was very thoughtful, and his response was, dare we, Mike? In other words, it was something that had not been done, reach out across the community, and he said it very well. Lanny also, I think, framed the circumstance that we experienced in our community well. He said, you know, and by that time we'd hooked up with George Goodwin, and he said, you know, guys, I don't have bad race relations. He said, I don't have good race relations. I don't have any race relations. And that sort of typified where we were in the community.
We came back to Montgomery, and Morris Smith was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and of course Randy George was there in the chamber. And we discussed the issue with him, and he said, well, first of all, in Montgomery, if you want to get something started, you better go see Emory Farmer, the mayor. And we visited Emory at his office, and Emory said, if you're trying to do something biracially, you've got to have black involvement and support in it. And he said, go see Solomon C. and see what whether Solomon thinks it's a good idea or not.
Solomon and Mayor Farmer found themselves professionally on different sides of the table frequently, and they were adversarial in other ways. And when we went to see the mayor to tell him what we were doing, and the paper and whomever, and what we weren't doing, you know, we wanted to be understood. We said, yeah, where's the right place to start in the black community? And he just right away said, Solomon Say. So we went to see Solomon. He looked at us like a bunch of do-gooders, you know, and what are these guys, what do they want me to do, money or whatever? He heard us through very patiently, and at the end he said, how'd you get my name? And I think it was George said, Mayor Farmer. And I've told this story in front of Solomon a number of times, and he was smoking a cigarette and he almost inhaled the wrong way and he almost blanched. And he couldn't believe that Emory Farmer had recommended him as the best guy to be an introducer in that community.
And I've always thought well of what Leadership Montgomery is doing. Despite the fact that when they called, they told me that Emory had recommended that they talk to me. And
he said, I think it might work, and here are the names of the people that are going to work with you.
I have no doubt Todd Road was the precipitating factor behind changes that took place in Montgomery. I think that it created an atmosphere in Montgomery that permitted change to take place.
And so he gave us the list of the blacks to serve on the first group. And so that's how we put together the first steering committee that started off with the chamber support, and the chamber provided the secretarial and office staff to support us. And we copied the original program from Birmingham as far as the class work, that we basically modified it for Montgomery, but we followed that synopsis. And Lanny was the first chairman, and Mike was the one to recruit the class, and my job was to put the first educational program together.
I don't think we were, I think we were sort of lit by the same fuse. I don't think we get discouraged. Did we get some backlash? Yeah. It's not worth mentioning.
We probably would not have gotten Leadership Montgomery off the drawing board without Todd Road.
Sure, we did something that was helpful in creating the organization and getting it going, and stayed with it all for a number of years. But I think what's really was a leap of faith at the organization. It was a leap of faith that when people of goodwill get together and talk, and just talk, that good things come out of that. And that was really the whole strategy, the whole concept. And by granny, it worked.
Now, decades later, Leadership Montgomery continues to serve as a catalyst for leaders from all walks of life to share, plan, and dream for a better Montgomery. Over the years, this organization has built bridges between communities, but more significantly, it has built friendships and relationships that will serve as a lasting legacy to Leadership Montgomery's purpose for many years to come.
The Todd Road incident serves as a constant reminder that reconciliation is possible, that positive results can be extracted from negative circumstances.
A lot of things happened since 1983, the incident that we're talking about.
The Todd Road situation was a result of maybe 100 years of injustice and wrongdoing to people who were poor and black. This is one thing that I realized, and I didn't until I became a journalist, that there were thousands, maybe millions of poor white people who had no power, and they were treated unjust.
It was not a satisfactory ending, and it did not serve the people of Montgomery what happened as a result of that, which I guess is why we're here today. You know, maybe the one good thing that came out of it was organization that you folks have.
But there's some constants that remain that I think are important. One is exactly what this video is about, which is to remind us why Leadership Montgomery was started by its founding fathers. And two, why do we continue it? Why do we need to continue it? I think those are important for us always to keep up there in the forefront, because discrimination changes over time. It becomes more subtle. It can grow if we don't stop it.
So I think that we've come a long ways. We've learned some lessons, and there probably was, even though we may not have seen it in 1983, there probably was a silver lining.
Clearly we have progressed. There has been significant progress in the way we mingle with each other, the way we react toward each other, the way we socialize together. Some of that has been brought about as a result of deliberate effort, and some of it has been brought about as a result of what I will call catalytic efforts.
And racial politics is very strong in Montgomery, and someday I would like to see that we grow out of racial politics, that we can look at the individual regardless of color or race and elect those that are most effective leaders.
We've got to continue to build that communication, and how you build it, in my opinion, is by personal relationships.
Leadership Montgomery was great for me in that I spent a lot of time around people that I otherwise would not have known, and we developed close friendships. Now, 10 years later, many of those friendships still exist.
And so first you have to break down barriers. People have to be comfortable with each other and make sure that this is nothing unusual, different from the norm. And once you understand that, just like coming into court, going to a doctor, everything becomes easier then. The whole interaction process becomes easier if you have an understanding of that other person.
As generations develop, attitudes change, and attitudes, after all, are based on experiences. So people who have not had certain personal experiences feel less strongly about certain issues. They mix on a different level. They have gone to school together, they've been in Boy Scouts together, they've gone to the same YMCA as opposed to separate ones, they've read together in the same library as opposed to separate libraries. So their lives have intersected in ways that older people like me have not experienced in their childhood. That too has helped.
What has come out of Leadership Montgomery, I would say everything that you see before you and everything that you see coming in the future will be an outgrowth of the relationships and the commitment to a strong city, a strong region that are part of the Leadership Montgomery legacy.
But there are always challenges. We don't know what tomorrow's challenges will be. But what Leadership Montgomery can do is continue to develop the core of leaders who know how to network and communicate, and they will find the solution to tomorrow's challenges.
So I hope that as we go forward, that we can continue to build on the success that One Montgomery has had, that Leadership Montgomery has had, all of those particular organizations, that we can in fact be One Montgomery.
What Leadership Montgomery has done for the city of Montgomery is the potential for what lies ahead. This is the charge for all future classes of Leadership Montgomery. What will you do? How will you make Montgomery a better place to live? Do you have the leadership ability to develop a project that will foster unity and address the important issues facing our community?